A relationship with the right referral partner could be a game changer for any B2B company. So what if you could reverse engineer these relationships at a moment's notice? Start a podcast, invite potential referral partners to be guests on your show, and grow your referral network faster than ever. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to the B2B Growth Show, a podcast dedicated to helping B2B executives achieve explosive growth. Whether you're looking for techniques and strategies or tools and resources, you've come to the right place. I'm James Carberry.
And I'm Jonathan Green.
Let's get into the show. Welcome back to the B2B Growth Show. We are here today with Maura Ginty. She is the CMO at 12 Team. Maura, how are you doing today?
I'm great. Glad to be here.
I'm really excited to chat with you, Maura. We were talking offline about the topic that we're going to be covering today. We're going to be talking about everything from ad testing to lead routing, and just the importance of really having empathy with your leads and understanding what the day in the life looks like for them. So I'm excited to dive into this. Before we do, Maura, could you explain to our listeners what you and your team are up to at 12 Team?
Yes. So 12 Team is an enterprise B2B company, and we have got about 15 years of exposure to how projects are managed, probably more data than most companies. And we looked at it from a pretty different way. Instead of traditional project management, we created a solution and a software platform with a really flexible data model so that it goes beyond agile planning and really allows all stakeholders to have a view into programs and projects and initiatives with all the information they need in one elegant system. So the idea is that you're empowering your experts so that they have all the information they need at hand. That's feeding up into a much more holistic view of a project status, so you know whether a program is working or not working. Breaking the silos so that there's collaboration across the different teams and workflows follow from the right task to the right task. And then executives have a really honest X-ray oversight with all of the high-level information in one place that's coming directly from their experts and their teams. It's good stuff. It's just the right time.
Yeah. So, Maura, we've got a lot of content that we're going to cover in this conversation, and so I'd love to just jump right in and kind of getting started by talking about the day in the life of a lead. And as we talk about this, the first thing that I think we should cover here is like defining each stage. This is kind of fundamental to the day in the life of a lead. Can you talk to us about that?
Absolutely. So the real trick is following your leads, right? So you're following your leads in a few ways. You're trying to understand their path, and that's the empathy part and the part that's customer journey. And you're trying to follow the numbers. So the important part in defining it is if you've got a lead, it can be very amorphous. So you need to agree on what's a lead that is just allowed to grow and be on its own? Like, what's a raw lead? Some people call it a contact or a prospect. Contact can get confusing with Salesforce language. Here we call it a raw lead. This is work that we've just gone through in the last few months. So what are the basics? What's a lead that marketing really shouldn't be interfering with too much? Then you have to define what's a lead that's a marketing qualified lead. What makes a lead marketing qualified? What about them? Like, what's your target audience, and do they fit into that group? So you have to have something of a definition of your target audience before you can decide what's marketing qualified, right? Because that's where you give them marketing attention.
Yep.
And that's more top of the funnel, but you have to define it in a sense of knowing what that description is and also what they're expecting, right?
Okay.
Because you can't establish a service level agreement and you can't decide what actions you should take with that marketing qualified lead or MQL until you have a really good description of it that matches your target audience in the widest way possible, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So the next piece, kind of beyond defining each stage and making sure the entire team is aligned and kind of in those definitions. Mm-hmm. This next piece is you call it conversion through sentiment, which has a lot to do with customer journey. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah. So in the conversion part, you can look at conversion. You can see, did they fill out this ebook form? Did they go on to this next piece of content? Did they come back frequently? Did they come back recently? So there's all the usual suspects when you're looking at a qualification step. But you also have to think about what they might be feeling as they do that. Some of that also has to do with the industry that they're in. So if you're working with public sector, you may know that they have a lot of employees, but that doesn't mean that they have a big budget, and that doesn't mean that they have a lot of spend in the way that another group might. And on the opposite end, if you're looking at a vertical, they may have completely different market pressures in one industry than another, even if they're doing the same kind of thing. So if they're both doing new product development, they face different pressures in the aerospace industry than they might for consumer packaged goods, just as an example. So you have to think about the pressures of the business lead and the pressures of the market and what they may be thinking and feeling in those conversion moments.
Got it.
So we tend as marketers, because we're dealing in bulk, we're the wholesale, we're looking at volume. And this is one of the ways that you start to break down to segments of leads and trying to prioritize which ones are more important. Another one is that I've used in the past is to look at sentiment. Look at sentiment and look at maturity. So there are a lot of tools now that help you understand what technology stack they're working with. So you can tell things from their technology stack. You can tell whether they're focused on consumer or B2B by the tools that they use. You can tell whether they're sophisticated or not sophisticated. You can tell if they're trying to be cutting edge or if they have a conservative approach in their marketing spend. You can tell these things by scraping their website. So it's not exactly sentiment, but it talks to their approach. And that fits in with what you may decide to do next with that lead. And that goes into the sales qualifying stages as you prepare them for the information they could have to go into that next level of conversation and to understand what they might be looking for.
Okay. You talk about, separating quality from definition. Is that what you're referring to there?
Exactly. So a lot of people, because so many companies and because it's becoming more and more of a best practice to say a marketing qualified lead becomes qualified through lead scoring. Right? That's how much marketing automation has become part of our day-to-day lives.
Yep.
And you have to separate that out because you can always change the definition of quality, but that doesn't mean that you change what an MQL is. So an MQL always has to have a certain set of complete information, and then quality is a second part of the bar. So you have to separate them out. So quality is one thing that can move up and down to control volume. But the other part are sort of fundamental characteristics of a lead and where they are in their research progress to be able to look at them. And that's why it becomes a day in the life of the lead. It's not just looking at it from your perspective. It's considering their market pressures, why quality may be going up and down seasonally. Another example is if you think about a day in the life of a lead, it can influence your campaign as well, because if you're trying to target other e-commerce companies, and you're a technology company, there's no point in talking to them after October. They're in code freeze. And you need to have that thought process as part of your qualification. And that becomes quality, not that an MQL is something different from day to day, if that makes sense.
Okay. So more of this next part of this kind of day in the life of a lead, you talk about the SLA, the service level agreement. Talk to us about how the SLA is related to kind of this idea of looking at the day in the life of your leads.
Yeah, so the SLA has to do with how many times you try to reach them, through what methods. How quickly you try to get back to them is always a fun, controversial topic. There's a Harvard Business Review blog article that came out a couple of years ago that, with great shock, that people felt like 24 hours was a fine amount of time to get back to a lead, when there's a huge delta in success rate in 1 hour versus 2 hours. And you still have most B2B companies thinking that 24 hours is fine. And then you have a 60% drop-off between the first hour and the second hour. And there are more and more studies around this where there's a quick devaluation of an online lead. And I'm sure it's different from industry to industry and context to context, but we all know that it's fast. So that's why you need a service level agreement so that you have an understanding of how quickly it's okay to get back to them.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
And it's not on your side. It's not on their side. It's not up to them. If you get a voicemail box, that happens. But on your side, you have to do the right actions from your side.
Yep. Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And these last two, and before we move on to talking more about the data, these last two are actions and benchmarks. Talk to us about, what these are in context of, thinking about your leads, kind of the day in the life of them.
Yep. So with actions, it's a little bit of that, like, okay, so you've agreed that they have some value and you need to figure out what it is, right? So you may have a lead qualification call. You may simply have them go through more online activities before you engage with direct sales. But the idea is that what are the next steps that you want to have happen? So you've agreed to follow up with them. If you get a hold of them, what are you going to do? What are you trying to offer them? What's the value? What are your best recipes to move them to the next stage? That's a lot of the work that we've been doing recently. And it was great to dive into our benchmarks. And you have to think about your own benchmarks and external ones. So Forrester, Salesforce, Aberdeen, a bunch of different companies have looked at what are the average conversion rates from phase to phase for a B2B company. And we found we weren't in line with that. After just a couple rounds of funnel tracking, we were looking at the conversion and the volume and the targets for every stage of the lead process. And by looking at that, within 2 months, we knew we had to change our lead routing, because we looked not just where our conversions were changing, but that benchmark.
Got it. Okay. So can you share again, where can people access those benchmarks if they want to start really self-examining of how they're doing against those?
Yeah, they're pretty publicly available. Forrester's had one available for B2B companies based on a survey of B2B companies. I believe it was 100 employees and above. So you can look at the Forrester B2B lead funnel. Salesforce and Aberdeen also had that. I can share URLs later on.
That's great. That's great. I just wanted to have listeners have an idea of where they could. I mean, you can Google anything today, so that's super helpful. This next piece that I want to talk to you about, Maura, is around the data, specifically kind of tracking and optimizing where these leads are coming from. Can you talk to us about that?
This is that part about from ad group and onwards. So as you start to be able to create cohorts of your leads, you need to start looking at where they come from and when. And looking at cohorts is different than looking at channel.
Okay.
Because it's where they come from and when. And what patterns are these groups following.
Got it.
So you're trying to get as much to segmentation as you can, so you're following like groups over time. If you're dealing with more complexity, you can start with simple channel and chronology. But the more you can get, the better. So that's where it comes from. Starting to be able to look at where they come from, setting up tagging, even if it's as simple as Google Tag Manager, setting up your marketing automation to track where they come from. CRMs are doing a great job of tracking that all the way through. So in an ideal world, you want your customer success team, after the sign of the deal, to know every major step of their path towards purchase. So what was the research they were doing for the problem they wanted to solve? How did the use case scenario that they talked with a salesperson address that need? And carry that all the way through to the first conversation that they have with their customer success manager. That's an ideal world. That's the best path you can hope for in the customer journey, in following that research point detected from an anonymous web visit all the way through to post-purchase, to be able to match everything that you do to solving their business problem. That's the essence of B2B.
Yep. So this next piece around data is a framework for forecasting and tracking. Can you talk to us about that?
Absolutely. So that's the exercise we just went through. Most companies do this in different levels of basics to sophistication. You start with your revenue waterfall and where your money is coming from for the year, the sales strategies you think will match that. And then the next part that has to do with a day in the life of a lead is specific to how many leads do we need to match that revenue waterfall. So it's all the backwards math of saying the revenue that we need, what percent is coming from marketing, what's coming from sales, what do we expect to influence the direct sales, and how do we map that backwards to the right target for opportunities. So are we matching a pipeline that has 3-to-1 or even 4-to-1 ratio? How many SQLs typically turn into an opportunity? How many MQLs turn into an opportunity? And that's where that internal, your own benchmarking versus an industry standard where, 5%, for example, Forrester has 5% conversion from traffic to MQL.
Got it.
So looking at that all together so that you're on the same page with your sales team, for revenue waterfall. And the difference that can make, and as we've seen with great examples from Salesforce and Google, all of the giants, this can be applied all the way down to a small B2B company to say, like, what you want to have, the conversation you want to hear between marketing and sales is, if the marketing budget changes, my sales number changes. If my sales number needs to change, my marketing budget needs to change. So that mutual relationship is part of the planning and part of the expectation.
This last piece of the conversation that I want to focus on, Maura, is around routing. Can you talk to us kind of at a high level, for those not familiar with that term, what do you mean by routing? And then I want to get into some more granular specifics of it.
Yeah, so when I talk about lead routing, it's how you take those definitions and the SLA and the actions and you manage it for volume. So the revenue waterfall needs to be your reference point for targets. So that's where you get your forecasting and where you track your actuals. And in a way that becomes what you're targeting for routing. And then there's the day-to-day weather report, right? Where you're never really sure how many leads are going to come in from one day to the next. You may have something of a pattern with your business, but there are always unexpecteds. There can be press coverage you didn't know was coming. There could be an analyst review. There could be, we saw something recently where there was a big announcement from the government, and that drove a wave of ebook downloads that we didn't expect. We were fortunately able to track it back. But when you get those ups and downs, when you have this sort of waves of incoming, then the other thing you can do, other than forecasting and tracking, is to target how many need to come through. And if you know how many need to come through, that's where it goes back to those quality decisions, because quality can go up and down from day to day. Okay. And it becomes a question of what is the minimum? What's the minimum target that we need? And what's the capacity we have on the other end to match that? So that has to do with marketing and sales talking very directly about, if I give you this volume, do you have the sales team or the lead qualification team to catch it?
Got it.
What's your maximum capacity so that I'm trying to meet that on a daily basis?
Yep.
Not exceed it and not drag it too low.
Yep. Okay. So we've gone over a ton today. Is there anything else that you think listeners should understand before I let you go?
I think there's just a lot of fancy new stuff that can happen with this. So there's a lot you can do with machine learning. And I sort of joked in some of it that there's this endless machinery of, I feel like every month or two there's a great new tool or a new breakthrough in matching from data enrichment, or a new fundamental way of understanding where you can optimize leads. And as that becomes more and more impressive with predictable intelligence, there's just going to be more and more great ways to enhance how we route and understand the context of our leads and be able to better predict how well they're going to meet as a match with the product that we offer. So there's a lot of exciting things there, but a lot of what I've covered today is just basics. It's the operational basics and knowing what a lead goes through. The last thing you want is for something to be dropped because your process wasn't clear on your side.
No, I love it. Maura, this has been fantastic. If there's somebody, they want to connect with you further on this, or they want to learn more about 1-2 Team, what's the best way for them to go about doing both of those things?
Well, I'm right there on LinkedIn. I do publish from time to time, but for 1-2 Team, we have a website in English and French, and you can find us online anytime.
And that is one2team.com. Is that correct?
Exactly. That's it. Yep.
Awesome, Maura. Well, thank you so much for your time today. This has been great.
Thank you.
If you're a B2B marketer, we want to feature you on sites like Huffington Post, Social Media Examiner, and Chief Marketer. Every week, we send out a question related to B2B marketing. We use the responses to those questions to fuel the content we write for really popular websites. So head over to sweetfishmedia.com/questions and sign up today.
Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.